The cranberry sauce stained the white tablecloth as Helen surveyed the damage from her latest performance. Her satisfied smile indicating that ruining Thanksgiving dinner had been the intended outcome rather than an accident. The same Helen who'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of making family gatherings unbearable, while positioning herself as the victim of my supposed inadequacies. My name is Emma, I'm 28, and I just learned that some people mistake tolerance for weakness. This is the story of how I discovered that kindness without boundaries enables bad behavior rather than improving it. Emma, maybe you should let the real cooks handle holiday meals, Helen announced to the gathered family, her voice carrying the false concern she'd perfected for maximum humiliation. I know you're trying, but some people just don't have the domestic skills for traditional family celebrations. The domestic skills comment stung particularly because Helen knew I worked 60-hour weeks as a corporate lawyer while still managing to contribute homemade dishes to every family gathering. But acknowledging my professional success would undermine her narrative about my inadequacy as a wife and family member. I'll clean this up and prepare something else, I said quietly, kneeling to collect broken ceramic while Helen's satisfied audience, my husband's siblings, and their spouses, watched the familiar performance of my ritual humiliation. Don't bother, Helen waved dismissively. I always prepare backup dishes when you're cooking. I learned to plan around your ... limitations. My husband Michael sat silent at the head of the table as he had for 3 years of similar scenes. His mother's treatment of me had been escalating steadily, but his strategy of keeping the peace had enabled Helen's behavior rather than addressing it. My phone buzzed with a text from my property manager. November rent collected from all Highland Estates properties, Helen Morrison's unit included. Everything current. Highland Estates, the luxury senior community where Helen lived in what she believed was subsidized housing for retired teachers, not realizing that her comfortable lifestyle was funded by the daughter-in-law she'd been systematically tormenting for 3 years. Emma, while you're cleaning up your mess, could you refill the wine glasses? Helen commanded, treating me like household staff rather than family. And use the good crystal this time, not the everyday glasses you picked. The everyday glasses she was referring to cost more than most people's monthly salary. But Helen had developed expensive tastes since moving to Highland Estates, funded by rental arrangements she didn't understand. Actually, Helen, I said, setting down the broken plate and pulling out my phone, I think we need to have a conversation about household management and family respect. Her eyes narrowed with the suspicious wariness of someone who'd grown accustomed to unchallenged authority. What kind of conversation? The kind where we discuss how family members treat each other and what happens when that treatment becomes unacceptable, I replied, opening my contacts to call my property management company. Emma, you're being dramatic, Helen said with practiced dismissal. I'm just trying to help you improve as a wife and homemaker. Help involves support and encouragement, I corrected, putting my phone on speaker. What you've been doing is systematic harassment disguised as constructive criticism. The family table fell quiet as my call connected to Highland Estates Property Management, the company that handled Helen's rental arrangements, along with my other real estate investments. Good afternoon. This is Emma Chun calling about property management issues at Highland Estates, I said clearly. Watching Helen's face as recognition dawned that her daughter-in-law was discussing her housing situation with apparent authority. Ms. Chun, how can we help you today? Replied property manager Sarah Rodriguez, her professional tone indicating she knew exactly who was calling and why. I need to discuss the rental arrangement for Helen Morrison in Unit 47B, I continued, pulling out documentation Helen had never seen. Specifically, the lease terms and rental payment structure. Helen had gone pale, probably wondering why I had detailed knowledge of her supposedly private housing arrangements. Helen, I said, hanging up and turning to address her directly. We need to discuss your living situation and how it relates to your treatment of family members. My living situation has nothing to do with you, she replied, but her voice lacked its usual commanding authority. I opened my briefcase and spread out property ownership documents across the dining table, replacing the ruined Thanksgiving dinner with legal papers that would permanently change our family dynamics. Highland Estates is owned by Cheen Property Group, I announced, showing the deed and corporate structure documents. The same property group that's been subsidizing your rent for 3 years through what you believed was a teacher's retirement assistance program. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Helen's wine glass slipping from her suddenly nerveless fingers. You own my building, she whispered. I own the entire Highland Estates complex, I confirmed, showing her the comprehensive property portfolio that included not just her residence, but the golf course, spa facilities, and common areas she enjoyed daily. The retirement assistance program that's been covering 60% of your rent? That's my personal contribution to your housing costs. Michael finally found his voice. Emma, you never told me you were helping pay for Mom's apartment. Because I wanted her to feel independent and dignified, I replied, looking at Helen directly. I thought providing financial support without creating obligation would help her feel secure during retirement. I didn't realize that security would be used as a platform for attacking the person providing it. Helen stared at the property documents, probably calculating how much money I'd been spending to ensure her comfortable lifestyle while she'd been making my family life miserable. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in 3 years. Because I hoped kindness would eventually be reciprocated with basic respect, I said simply. I thought that if you felt secure and valued, you might extend that same consideration to other family members. I gathered up the documents and returned them to my briefcase, making a decision that would establish new boundaries for our relationship going forward. Helen, the rental assistance program is being discontinued effective January 1st, I announced. You'll need to pay market rate rent or find alternative housing arrangements that you can afford independently. You can't do that to me, Helen protested, panic replacing her usual arrogance. I can't afford market rate rent on my teacher's pension. You should have considered your housing security before spending 3 years attacking the person who was subsidizing it, I replied. Kindness has limits, and you've reached mine. The family gathering dissolved into uncomfortable conversations as everyone processed the revelation that Helen's comfortable retirement had been funded by the daughter-in-law she'd been systematically mistreating. Over the following weeks, Emma, I owe you an apology, Helen said during our first civil conversation in 3 years. I didn't realize how much you'd been doing to help me, and I'm ashamed of how I repaid your generosity. What would you do differently if you could go back? I asked, curious about her reflection process. I would have treated you with the respect you deserved as my son's wife and as a person who was being kind to me, she replied. I let my insecurities about losing Michael's attention make me cruel to someone who was actually supporting my well-being. The most valuable lesson wasn't about family dynamics or financial leverage, was about the importance of setting boundaries when kindness is consistently met with cruelty. Helen had escalated her attacks because my tolerance had enabled her behavior rather than encouraging better treatment. Sometimes the best response to family toxicity isn't endless patience, but clear consequences that demonstrate the cost of treating generous people poorly. Helen learned that comfort funded by others' kindness shouldn't be used as a platform for attacking those benefactors, while I learned that boundaries protect not just yourself, but also the relationships worth preserving. The young woman she'd tried to drive away from her son became the person who controlled her housing security, proving that assumptions about power and dependency can be dramatically wrong. More importantly, establishing consequences for toxic behavior had transformed a destructive family relationship into something resembling mutual respect. The transformation in Helen's behavior had ripple effects throughout the extended family, creating opportunities for healthier relationships that had been impossible while she dominated family dynamics through manipulation and cruelty. Emma, "I wanted to thank you for how you handled the situation with Mum," said Michael's sister Jennifer during our first pleasant family conversation in years. "We all knew her behavior toward you was wrong, but none of us knew how to address it without causing family drama." "What stopped you from speaking up?" I asked, curious about the family dynamics that had enabled Helen's behavior for so long. "Fear of her retaliation and manipulation," Jennifer admitted. "Mom has always been able to make life difficult for family members who crossed her. But we didn't realize that her comfortable lifestyle depended on your generosity." The revelation had shifted power dynamics throughout the family, with Helen's adult children finally able to establish boundaries with their mother now that they understood. She didn't have unlimited ability to punish dissent. "How has your relationship with her changed since she learned about the rental assistance?" I asked. "She's actually trying to be pleasant and considerate instead of demanding and manipulative," Jennifer replied. "It's like discovering she has consequences for bad behavior made her capable of better behavior." 6 months after the Thanksgiving revelation, Helen's transformation was so complete that family gatherings had become genuinely enjoyable experiences, rather than exercises in conflict management and damage control. "Emma, I've been thinking about how to make up for the past 3 years," Helen said during one of our weekly coffee meetings, a tradition we'd started after establishing mutual respect. "I know apologizing doesn't undo the damage I caused to your marriage and family relationships." "What kind of making up did you have in mind?" I asked, curious about her reflection on the consequences of her previous behavior. "I want to contribute positively to family gatherings instead of sabotaging them," she replied. "I've started cooking classes, so I can actually help with holiday meals instead of criticizing your contributions." The effort to develop useful skills rather than maintaining artificial superiority through criticism represented genuine character growth that went beyond simply stopping negative behavior. "I've also been volunteering at the community center, working with elderly residents who don't have family support," Helen continued. "It's helped me understand how fortunate I am to have a daughter-in-law who cared enough to help me financially, even when I was treating her terribly." 1 year after establishing consequences for her toxic behavior, Helen had evolved from family antagonist into someone who actively contributed to positive family dynamics and community relationships. "Your approach to handling Mom's behavior has become a model for other family members dealing with similar issues," said Michael during one of our discussions about family relationship improvements. "My cousin Sarah used similar strategies to address her mother-in-law's manipulation, and it worked just as effectively." The most meaningful recognition came from Helen herself, who wrote a letter thanking me for forcing her to confront behavior patterns that had been damaging her relationships with everyone in her life. "Emma, I realize now that my attacks on you were really about my fear of losing importance in Michael's life," her letter explained. "I thought that making you look bad would make me look better, but all it did was make me into someone my son was ashamed to be around." Her letter continued, "Your kindness in supporting my housing while I was being cruel to you showed me what actual generosity looks like, and your strength in establishing boundaries when that kindness was abused taught me that respect has to be earned rather than demanded." 2 years later, Helen had become one of my closest allies within the family, using her influence to support rather than undermine my relationship with Michael and my integration into family traditions and decision-making. "I want to nominate Emma for the family's annual service award," Helen announced during our holiday planning meeting. "She's contributed more to our family's well-being and stability than anyone else, and it's time we formally acknowledged her importance to all of us." The nomination was unanimous, representing a complete reversal from the family dynamics that had existed when Helen was actively trying to diminish my role and importance within family structures. 3 years after the Thanksgiving confrontation, Michael and I renewed our wedding vows in a ceremony planned and hosted by Helen, who wanted to publicly acknowledge the daughter-in-law she'd once tried to drive away. Emma taught me that family means supporting each other rather than competing for attention and control, Helen said during her speech at our renewal ceremony. I'm grateful she had the strength to establish boundaries that forced me to become worthy of being part of her family rather than just demanding acceptance through manipulation. The most valuable lesson wasn't about financial leverage or family politics, it was about the difference between enabling bad behavior through endless tolerance and creating positive change through appropriate consequences. Helen's transformation proved that even deeply toxic relationship patterns could change when people face real costs for treating others poorly. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is refusing to accept treatment that diminishes both of you, creating space for authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than fear, manipulation, or artificial hierarchy. Helen had tried to establish dominance through cruelty, but facing consequences for that cruelty had taught her that genuine influence comes from positive contributions rather than negative control. The young woman she'd dismissed as unworthy of her son became the catalyst for her own personal growth and the architect of improved family relationships that benefited everyone involved, proving that boundaries protect not just the person establishing them, but also the relationship's worth, preserving and improving.